Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Yardman handheld leaf blower. Customer complaint is that the recoil rope is broken. Replacing the recoil rope on one of these blowers is a pretty simple task, unlike some of the other blowers where you got to split the case in half. This one just uses 4 screws that hold a starter cup onto the engine. We're using a T20 Torx bit in this case to remove those 4 screws, and once they're out, that whole starter cup will just lift right off the engine. Once the cup is off, take a look at those white starter pawls that are on the engine. Make sure that they move freely, they're not broken, there's still spring tension on them. If those are broken, you'll want to address that issue now. So this starter assembly, once off, only has one other screw in it, and that's holding that pulley on. The pulley is the white piece there I got my hand on. We'll pull that screw out. And be careful, there's a spring underneath here. You should be wearing safety glasses when you're working on these starter assemblies. Take a good look at the spring. Make sure that it's not broken, it's not bent on the ends, and it's not all dried out. If it's getting dry or rusty, you can add some oil to that spring and lube it up. So you saw we removed the old piece of rope from the pulley, and we're going to take a fresh piece of rope the same diameter. That's important, and we're going to put it right back into the same hole that the old piece of rope came out of. One overhand knot in the end of the rope, and we'll pull it tight in the pulley. Make sure that the knot is not standing proud of the level of the pulley, or it'll drag on things. So you look here, this is the direction that the rope is pulling out of the pulley, off the pulley, out of the starter assembly. You're going to want to wind the rope on the pulley. Basically, you wind it in the opposite direction so that when you're pulling it out of the starter cup, it's rolling off of the pulley. So just take a closer look here at how this is on there. The rope goes through the starter cup, and when the pulley is laying in place like this, it goes from the starter cup through the hole and around the pulley. When you unwind the pulley as you're pulling on the rope, the pulley's moving this direction and more rope is feeding out. Make sure you got it the right way. If you got it the wrong way, you can damage your starter spring. Now, I did say that it's important to have the right diameter rope, and the reason for that is if you have too much rope on, you're going to be able to pull all the rope out, and then when it stops, it's only going to stop because the starter spring is binding. So if you have a thicker rope, you won't get as many wraps on it, and then you won't have that binding problem, as long as you don't pre-wind the spring too much, and we'll get into that. So at this point, we have the rope on the pulley. The pulley is bolted back into the starter cup, and if this guy would get his butt in gear, we'd cut this little bushing off the end of the rope here. We're going to need that for our new rope. Right now, the piece of rope that I'm using is way too long. It's probably a foot too long. We're going to have to take a pick or something and push this rope through the handle. Be careful doing this. You can wreck the rope or get a little cut started in it that's going to, over time, get worse and worse. We've got the rope through the handle. We're putting the bushing on. And at this point, we're just going to put a temporary knot on the very end of the rope because we know the rope's too long, but we don't want to lose everything if the spring unwinds on us. So we'll grab the rope, and you'll notice the little notch in the pulley. That notch is to allow the rope to go in the notch, and then it'll clear the sides of the cup as you're winding the spring. Wind the spring, in this case counterclockwise, toward the direction of the hole in the cup that the rope goes through. So as you pull on the rope, you get spring tension and the rope returns. Pretty basic. There can be a little bit of fumbling getting this rope into the notch and preloading the spring, but you'll see that we're winding the spring counterclockwise in the direction of the hole in the cup. And at that point where I have my hand now on the rope, when I pulled it all the way out, I saw that I wasn't bound against the spring. If I were to pull the rope farther, the spring would unwind farther. I'm not bottomed against it when the rope's all the way out. So I've determined my length, which is not more rope on the pulley than it can handle. I mean, if you got too much rope on there, as it winds up and the layers of rope build up, if it binds against the side of the cup, you can have problems with that. So you can't just put any amount of rope on there that you want. We burn the end of the rope just to keep it from fraying, and we'll tuck it into the handle here. Everything feels good. The rope rewinds the way it should. We're going to put it back on. The only thing you got to worry about here is orientation of the starter assembly. You could put it on 4 different ways technically. You got to make sure you put it on so that the rope is facing you when you want to pull on it. And you have to make sure that the starter assembly isn't jammed against the top of the starter dogs, those pawls that we looked at earlier. An easy way to get it to seat is to pull on the handle of the rope a little bit while you're dropping it onto the engine, and you can usually get it just to work its way in between those starter pawls and sit flush where it belongs. So we got our 4 screws in. In this case, we're going to put some fuel in the machine and see if it runs. That's all I got for you on the Yardman handheld blower rope rewind repair. Thanks for watching. Later.